Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another week at the Better Events Podcast. This is Mary Davidson, one of your co hosts. And in today's episode, we are talking all about the business of events. This is going to be a fun conversation because we're talking about how events relate to the structure of a business. So, whether you are a business owner or you do events in your career, this will be applicable to you because we talk about things from having ownership to creating lean events to doing budget driven events and everything that is applicable to us as event professionals. So let's go ahead and get into it.
Welcome to the Better Events Podcast. Join two event strategists, Logan Clements and Mary Davidson, who believe we can all create, host, and attend better events. In this podcast, you will learn about event strategy and actions that you can use today as an event host, planner, or manager. Hear directly from the people who are creating innovative and inspiring events today and tomorrow, and grow your business along the way. Now, let's get started, and thanks for listening to the Better Events Podcast.
Hi, friend. Welcome back to another episode of the Better Events Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Logan Clements, and I'm joined by fellow co-host Mary Davidson. And before we jump into our topic here about the business of events, we got our conversation starter. Mary, it's October. It's spooky. We are 2 weeks-ish away from Halloween, so maybe a little bit of time for listeners to still think of what they want to do as their Halloween costume. But Mary, what is one of your most memorable Halloween costumes?
Well, for most of my life, I was a cat because I like cats. So if that's not iconic, which it's really not, then I would say when I was a little older, I can't remember when, like maybe high school, maybe I was older than that even. I dressed up as Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh, but it was like more like artsy Eeyore. We'll try to find a picture and post it because I don't know how to explain it. But I basically wore like all denim, and then I had these Eeyore slippers, which really sold it. And then I had like a tail, like a pink tail, and my hair was in pigtails, and it was Eeyore vibes. And it was like very homemade, but I think it came together really nicely. And so I don't normally do stuff like that, but at that time I was like, hey, this actually worked. So I'm gonna say Eeyore. Logan, what about you? What's one of your most memorable Halloween costumes?
Yeah, I think both of us were raised on a healthy amount of Disney. So I feel like I went through all the Disney costumes as a kiddo, like Cinderella and all kinds of things. But so my most memorable one, I'd say, and I will admit, listeners, my fun fact is I think I trick or treated all the way through high school because my theory was as long as you dressed up and went all out in costume, you could still go get free candy. And I had a small contingent of friends that continued to do that with me. So I think this was middle school, but maybe it was elementary. I can't remember. I have been this height since I think I was 10. So I went as the runaway bride. And we actually went to Goodwill and bought a wedding dress that still had the tags on it, that had probably some horrible story of someone returning it and something happening. But it was a wedding dress. And then I loved the idea because I was running away. I got to wear sneakers, which was really comfortable for trick or treating. And then I think I had a little cardboard sign my mom helped me make that said like Vegas or bust or something. And I remember it was just fun because I got to wear a really pretty dress, but I was in comfy shoes. And that was just a really fun costume that I can't remember. Maybe it was because I'd seen the movie recently. I don't remember where it came from, but that was a fun one.
I love it. That's like super fun. That's something that I feel like anyone could do. If you need an idea, there you have it. Amazing. All right. So don't forget we need to do our plug for the Better Events Conference because we love everything about it and there's still time to be involved. So join us in person in Seattle on Thursday, December 18th for the in-person day of the 2025 Better Events Conference. We had our virtual day already. We're really stoked about the in-person day. You can check it out by visiting bettereventspod.com/conference for more information. And we'd love to see you there in Seattle. So, with that, we'll get into our topic for today. So, on this podcast, we talk a lot about events, we talk a lot about business. And today we're putting the two together and talking about the business of events. And so, this is kind of taking a spin on how events have components that are similar to a business. Events kind of run like a business. So, this is applicable for everyone, we think. Because whether you have a business or not, this is more about just events and anybody, we as event professionals can run our events like businesses. So this is for you. And we are excited to get into our topic for today.
No, it's something that we've been talking about, and I feel like it's good just to make those connection points, especially coming from it as business owners of event businesses. So, Mary, to start us off, why is it important to treat events more like strategic business operations rather than just a party or social gathering?
I think this is actually a challenge because we're so wrapped up in the event that we're executing. It's hard to see past that. We've talked about that, before on the podcast as well. And so having your event be something that you see as a long-term thing, like maybe it is happening year after year, or maybe it's serving a community where events are happening year after year. It lives beyond just that night or that week of the event. And so with that mindset, I think there's more of a strategy on how to keep it something that lives on. And that is also kind of like what a business is. And so I think it's important because it helps your events grow, last longer, and be successful long term. And so many other things. But that's something that I think is really important. I know sometimes when we work with nonprofits, um, it's hard because some of them have such limited resources, but many of them don't really run their nonprofit like a business. They run it more just like a fundraising thing. And it's hard because there's so many business principles that we can apply to make something successful long term. So that's kind of why I was going that route. But Logan, what about you? Why do you think it's important to treat events more like strategic business operations?
Yeah, I think, I mean, an event I feel like is honestly just a series of tasks and decisions, right? And if you are just treating it like a really long to do list, that can make it really hard to be repeatable and, to your point, able to grow on it. And so I think this is just a really great mindset for folks to have. And maybe your event clients, you can't convince them because, like, to your point, Mary, your example, that nonprofit, maybe you work with them once a year and they can't really buy into that. They want to keep doing it the way they've been doing it. But you, as the planner, could invest in this mindset of it being more like a business operations, because then you're trying to make something that's repeatable and something that you can then like grow upon. And so making sure you're setting up yourself for success and having those documents, whether it was your work back schedule or those lessons learned, so that when you do this again, and maybe you don't do it again with the same client, but a different client, you're growing and evolving just like a business would. And I think that also makes it a lot more attainable when you're first starting out, of trying to figure out how an event works or how to do an event. If you have like that lovely checklist or standard operating procedures, I think about you, Mary, like when you bring in a new planner to work with you, having some of those documents that you already have is a lot easier than just being like, we're doing a gala. All right, great. Yep, just Google gala and start doing things, and having those documents, which I think you've already created because you're a business owner. But I think those are things you could start putting into place, even if it's just you, so that you're able to make it not just a one-off like a party. It's more of an actual event that then builds upon itself, like your business.
We interrupt this episode to remind you of our upcoming in person day of the Better Events Conference on Thursday, December 18th in downtown Seattle. We would love to see you there. If you already have purchased tickets and attended the first day, our virtual day of the conference, you can upgrade your ticket. Just check your swap card email and we'll get you squared away. If you have not attended the conference yet this year and would like to, you can check out bettereventspod.com/conference, and there is a link for you to purchase your in-person day ticket as well.
Yes, and I love the option there because you can retroactively get access to some of the recordings, not all of the sessions from our virtual day, but you can go back if you feel the FOMO that you couldn't join us in person. So upgrade your existing ticket or purchase a ticket if you hadn't pulled the trigger yet. We are going to have an amazing day filled with interactive workshops, small group work. Again, think of what we were saying about the virtual. It's that interactive piece. We're going to deliver what we promise of you meeting 3 new people and learning 3 new things that you can apply to your event process immediately.
And we know that virtual events can be magical, and it was magical. We also know that the energy that's going to be in the room for the in person day is just something that is unparalleled. So we are encouraging you to join us and be a part of that if you're able. All right, we have so much to look forward to during that day of the conference. And so we hope to see you there.
And without further ado, let's get back to the episode. So, one of the concepts too with a business of events, I know, Mary, you've read this book about lean, like how to be lean in business. And apologies if I'm muffing up the title. But I think it's really helpful to apply this concept to what we're talking about here with the business event. So, can you, Mary, define for myself and our listeners, what does it mean to be lean, Lean, in business?
Yeah, well, simply put, I think a lot of people use the phrase just to kind of mean it's like a tight business. It's really streamlined. There's not a lot of like excess waste, which is what it is. But if you're like interested in this concept more, there are a handful of resources. But the one I like the most is called Lean Made Simple. It's a book and it's a podcast, so you could check it out. It's this manufacturing company out of Ireland, I believe. And they really break it down the concept well. But like very simply, for the sake of today, lean stems from Kaizen. Kaizen is a Japanese philosophy of business that a lot of people maybe have heard about before, but all it means is continuous improvement. So, a lean business or lean events just mean continually improving. So, making small fixes every day to improve. And that creates a streamlined business, AKA streamlined events. And so that's why I think it's applicable to what we talk about today, because so many of the actions that we take leading up to events practice lean. And it also helps you save money at the end of the day, which is something I think that we're always trying to do in events as well. So I think there's a direct application here to having lean events.
Yeah, that's a really interesting concept. The way I think it sounds overwhelming to me at first that you describe it. I'm like, oh yeah, that is events. I mean, we talk about on the podcast here, our post-event process is something both Mary and I are very proud of, and that whole concept is what our post-event process is, which is small incremental changes to make next year a little bit better or a little bit easier. Because I will continue to say, listeners, you can never have a perfect event. And maybe you're listening and you're like, yes, Logan, I did have one. Well, that's great for you. I'm proud of you. Maybe I have a perfect event in my past where everything went perfectly according to plan on my side. I probably have, but also most likely, more often than not, it's not going to go perfect. And so having those notes of, how you can change it, how you can improve, I think is so important. And that's interesting because I guess, it would be in business as it is in events. So I like that connection, Mary. Thank you for putting it out there. Do you have an example outside of what
Yeah.
I just said with the post-event
I love the
process?
example you just shared. And I think that's actually the point is like there are so many things that we are already doing as event professionals that are lean. And so that's a great example. And then also just like a few others um, is like the concept of like overproducing. So printing too many programs or you've got too many lanyards and you're never going to use them again because they're branded for that year, like that type of idea. So trying to streamline that a little bit. Something like moving supplies from one room to the other to the other to the other when maybe there was a better way. You could just label everything before so you know where it needs to go. So you're saving time and resources. And then one other example, which I think will hit home with so many people, is like registration lines. So trying to make that process for the attendee more streamlined, better, quicker, and just, a better experience for them. So once again, these are things that we already think about. So you're doing it. It's just more consciously doing it. And so that kind of shifts us into our second section about ownership. So in events, we are usually in charge of some component of the event, whether it's the whole thing or just a piece. And then same in business, it's the idea of having ownership over the things that you do and the business success and all of that good stuff. So, Logan, one of those things I think is helping people understand kind of what they're in charge of. So, how do you assign clear ownership to people in their roles so that they can truly take charge of the areas that they're in charge of?
Yeah, I'm going to come at it from my perspective, usually as a solopreneur or contractor. I feel like hearing this question initially, I'm like, from the proposal stage or the scope of work contracting stage. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I have a section on my proposal where I talk about what I do. And then I also have a section where I talk about what my client does. And client, I use very broadly. It's essentially my like, not me section of being like, I'm not doing it. So you guys are doing it, whether you do it or you hire someone else to do it. Like, that's just not mine. And I think that is really helpful because I can have those conversations early on of trying to understand, what am I owning? What am I running with? And, what documents am I making? What rehearsals am I scheduling? What calls am I on? That kind of stuff. And then it makes it clear to them. I more highlight on that, not every single thing they have to do for an event, because that would be a lot of work on my end, but it's more, hey, what key components, and some of it's from experience, like I will not find speakers for you. Meaning I will not go out and like recruit a speaker. You need to the client will source and introduce the speakers to Logan, because once they're confirmed, yes, then I'm your gal, but I'm not, that would be like a specific service you would hire me to do if you wanted me to do that. So I think that helps with me knowing what I own, what clients owning, knowing what I own. And then I have that written in that scope of work, and it's super helpful for me to go back to, because especially when our events or our contracts might span a couple months, having that to go back and be like, oh yeah, I said only a handful, this isn't a big scope. Why? Oh, because you only said a handful of meetings. So I'm not going to agree to a weekly check-in call. Like, that doesn't make sense. But Mary, maybe do you want to take it more as like the on-site part or larger
Yeah,
team part?
for sure. But I love what you said. And I started implementing that after the first time I heard you share that. And it is great. Clients will be like, yeah, can you put that in there so I know what I'm in charge of? And I'm like, absolutely. So it is truly a great tip for sure. And then yeah, like you said, with more of a team or on site, I personally am continually trying to figure out my management and leadership style, and I feel like it changes a little bit. So this is a learning process for me. So I don't have like the perfect answer. But I've acknowledged that I lean into micromanagement naturally, and so I have to do whatever I can to not do that. And so the things that make me not micromanage are making sure that I, as a leader of some area, set expectations super clearly with the people who are working on that. And then I feel like that allows me to step back. So I don't like to make assumptions. I kind of like to like over explain at the beginning and feel like, okay, I've given them everything they need to be successful in my mind. And then I trust them to ask questions if they need more so that they can be successful. And I think that's what's scary is that I feel like in order to have a successful business or events in this ownership concept is to trust people to do the things that you've told them to do or that they've agreed to do. And that same thing with what Logan shared about working with clients, right? We trust that they're going to fulfill their end of the bargain. And then you course correct along the way, right? Because stuff happens, mistakes are made or whatever. So I think the course correction is really important. But for me, it's just about setting expectations.
And I think my favorite thing to do as we get closer to an event and I'm on these calls where, again, maybe it's not in my scope, but things, and people are like, oh yeah, and then the t-shirts will make it to the table. And it's like, great, who? Like, I just think I sound like an owl, just being like, who is getting the t-shirts to the, like, because like you can just rattle off all those tasks. And that has been helpful identifying gaps. Because I think an example where unclear ownership caused me some issues was I had an event and we got there and we're all like, great, great, everything's good. And all of a sudden it goes, okay, where are the name badges? And it's like, oh, it's not in that box or that box. And it's like, nope, nothing in there. And like, sure enough, there'd been like so many of us involved in the proofing of these name badges, the sending of this list, the ordering of the name badges. And it was like the crucial final step of receiving the package of name badges just kind of fell by the wayside. And like, again, we'd had assigned someone to do it, but it was one of those where it's like, okay, maybe there should have been a second person just to like call them to be like, hey, did you open the box and make sure they're in there, is our lesson learned and our application for the future. But it was just one of those where I was like, wow, it's not even assigning one person to one step. It's, to your point, I mean, maybe a little micromanaging, Mary, but I'm like, at this point, we've had to do an event with no name badges. So now I'm like, it's on the list of just who's going to open the box and check that the name badges are there. Great. That is on my list for next time I do this event. How about you? Do you have other examples?
Well, I love what you said because when I'm in a meeting sometimes and I hear someone ask those who questions, I'm like, yes, they get it. That is somebody who gets it. So that's a great tip too. If you're like nervous about leading meetings, like be that person who's asking those questions and you look like you know what you're talking about. So that's good. Um, I similar situation. I don't think this is like an applicable statement overall, but like for event production, I do think if two people are in charge of like the same thing, then no one's kind of in charge. Like I think one person needs to be in charge and then maybe the other person owns like an area of it or something like that, you know. But I've just never been in a situation where I'm like on site at an event and I'm with somebody else and we're doing the same exact thing and it goes like super smoothly. I think it's like one person needs to be in charge of that component. But that being said, similar to your example, Logan, we were helping with like the checkout process for a fundraising event, which is very common. And the situation was like a little bit complicated. It was a really big event. So there were lots of people in charge of different areas, like location set. Like if you're at this point, this person's in charge. If you're at this point, this person's in charge. And the registration area was almost like a no man's land. And so all of a sudden we were like, oh, wait, this is like super unorganized. Who's in charge of this? And like no one could take ownership of that because no one thought that they were. And so we just had to all basically come together and figure it out. And it was kind of a hot mess. So that's kind of an example of like nobody was in charge, but everybody was in charge and it didn't really work out.
That's a good one. Yeah, and I would say also on the flip side, like taking ownership like a business, there are certain things at events that like you kind of have to have a paid person involved. It's like someone who's been a part of the event for longer than just your day of person who's showing up as a volunteer or something like that. And this is really applicable, I guess, explicitly to both if you're using volunteers or if you're just using like day of ambassador staffers, your $20 an hour, show up and execute a role. My mom has implemented this pro tip I learned of doing what I do it at registration always is have a trouble table, which we don't say the word trouble table to attendees. That's just internally, because I found if you have folks just showing up to help you, the more streamlined and like simple of here's the process to check someone in, but then you need to give them somewhere to go if it's complicated, meaning if their name's not coming up or they need something reprinted. Instead of trying to train everyone on how to react to all those situations, it's like you're dealing with the straightforward folks. Anyone who does not follow that process, kick them to me. And at one event, I am the trouble table, which I think there's other things and other like elements of events. Maybe you could have this where maybe you have, talent wranglers for speakers who are going to escort speakers, but you do have one lead person who can be the troubleshooter or the VVVIP person. Like there's ways I think you could think about streamlining it. And it's the same way I'd say as like a business where you kind of need a manager versus maybe an entry level person could do something, and having that clear, not micromanaging, but saying, here's how you can do what you're doing. And if you hit a roadblock or you have a problem, here's where you go. Because I do think I see some events where they try to offload that all onto a volunteer or onto a day of staffer. And that's where you can see some of that overwhelm kick in, because if you're giving them too many scenarios, they're like, well, but if it's this, then do that. But if it's that, do this. Like all of a sudden you're slowing everybody down. So I would just think about where in your event, in your staffing, you could implement this trouble table idea to help streamline and make things go faster.
Yeah, definitely. That works super well. So I think that's a really great example for sure. And so now we're transitioning into another section of our business of events, and that is budget related things. And unfortunately, money really runs businesses and events. And so there's lots of crossover here, but it's interesting to think about it, I think. So, Logan, how would you say a budget drives decision making for an event?
I mean, it's sometimes the ultimate decision maker. I think there's a very small class of clients that have a blank check for their event. They usually have some kind of overarching event budget and different buckets for the money. And maybe they could pull from one to feed another if they needed to. But I just constantly, budget can be one of the key decision makers in an event for why you can get the good, better, or the best, or the just okay, the premium, the fantastic. So I feel like I have a love-hate relationship with this, because I joke I don't really know if I really want a client that has no budget. But I will say there's a lot of scenarios that come up on site because budget-driven decisions were made, and they might not have been in the best interest of the actual event. And now we're having to troubleshoot because we cut somebody from our team last minute because the client saw that line item and was like, you don't need that extra person. And now those that were left are running around like crazy on site, some stuff like that. Or I had a client cut food and beverage was really expensive. And so they cut down breakfast. So it was super simple. I think it was like maybe grab and go pastries and some like cereal and stuff. And then the client lead had the CEO in her face. I was present, unfortunately, complaining about why there wasn't any bacon, because he really wanted bacon. And she was like, okay, she said, okay, I'll work on seeing what we can do. But that was a change we made, but okay, I'll see what we can do. And he walked off, and she was like, he was part of those meetings where we cut the premium breakfast because they're just seeing numbers and they
Not the
minus it.
bacon.
They cut the bacon, which, moral to that story, they added the bacon back in the next day. And then I funnily found out that that executive did not go to breakfast that morning. So didn't notice that they'd added it back in. But it's just one I always say, like, I've had so many, take out the word bacon, insert something else here, that it's really important to us as the professionals, as the event pros, to really help our clients understand the pros and cons of some of those budget driven decisions. But Mary, how would you answer that question?
Oh, I completely agree. Budgets, I think, are so big, so significant in business. But I just am so surprised at how many events we get involved in because we work with some smaller organizations sometimes where they truly do not have a budget for their event. Like I wish I could tell you it just happens sometimes, but it's actually most of the time, and that is incredibly disheartening to be honest. And so we're working with them and we're like, okay, so like, can you look at last year's numbers and just like try to figure something out? Or because, our scope to an extent, I don't want to give like a lot of like financial management and feedback. That's not really our expertise. But if you can give me a number, I can make sure that we're within that number. You know what I mean? And so we're like, our jobs are going to be so much easier when we get these catering quotes. If you could just let us know how much money you have for catering, like, and we'll make it work. We'll give suggestions based on that. And so, yeah, I think it's so important and it's so helpful for us as planners or producers to have that information up front. And so, absolutely, yeah, I think it drives all those decisions. And it's challenging too. I'm someone who I have less of a creative brain. I do have more of like a logistics brain. And so when I'm in a meeting and we're talking about all these fun ideas, I'm like, wow, this is so cool. But like, do you have a budget? Because once again, I'll just tell you which of these cool things fit within your budget. Like, this doesn't need to be a full conversation unless you can get it donated, or something like that. So I don't want to dim anybody's sparkle, but I mean, if we have the numbers, it just makes it a lot easier. So I think it's important.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, it's a beast sometimes. I feel like I always, again, you want more money, but I also anytime I've worked an event, I go, nobody usually gets everything they want. Like even the folks that have $1 million production budgets versus my folks who have $15,000 as their production budget, like they're not necessarily going to get all the bells and whistles, but we can still find them something that works. But yes, I'm with you, Mary. I don't love, and I can't imagine it like a business if I just like wouldn't tell you how much money I was willing to spend. I think there's a difference of like, you can openly say, I've never hired a business coach. So for me, it's like, I don't know what I would pay for a business coach because maybe it's $100 or maybe it's, $200 an hour. Like, I don't know what would be reasonable. So if I was looking for a business coach as a business, I would probably do research to gather information and then try to figure out, okay, where's my pain point? And so I think with our events, they can do that similarly for maybe a new service they're not aware of. But for certain things like food and beverage or AV, like, yeah, just give the number. Like, just say what it is. And yes, maybe you'll find one vendor that like you tell them you have $20,000 and they'll make their proposal $19,900. Great. But to you, that was in your budget. Like, so I always, my tactic usually though, I guess would be for you listeners, if you're in that situation, is I like to give a range because that kind of admits you don't know what things are worth. So it'd be like, hey, for AV, we'd budgeted between 10 and 15,000. And most of the quotes are going to come in probably closer to the 15 because they'll see the top of your range, but you'll get a couple that come in around that lower end. And then the hard part comes in, Mary, where you don't go with the cheapest option every time because sometimes cheaper is not better. And that's the same in business as it is in events. But we could do a whole episode on that.
Okay, so our next budget then money related question, because we will keep talking about it to an extent. Logan, can you measure ROI for events? Because with businesses, I think there's lots of like budget money buzzwords. ROI is one of them. So can you do that for events?
Yeah, talking about your return on investment. I think yes. I'm not a part of so much of that with my clients. So sometimes it's, I might be privy to them telling me if it was profitable or not, like meaning did they make more money in sponsorships and ticket sales and money coming in than they'd sent money coming out. For us, it's mainly like from a production perspective, ROI, like when I work with an agency, is more trying to make sure we stayed in our budget. And like anytime there are budget impacting decisions, like that's a whole conversation with the client if we have to charge more. But similar to a business, and like Mary, you and I have done this for the conference, is like we put a contingency fee in our budget. So we kind of put a little buffer. And I would do this in my business. So like, let's buffer a little extra than you think you need when it comes to taxes or expenses or whatever, so that you have some flexibility for some of that fun stuff and that creativity, or maybe the surprise overtime or that surprise extra 20 meals you had to add last minute because all of a sudden 20 more people wanted to come. Having that in there, I think is helpful. And that hits our ROI because then that doesn't eat into the profit. But I'm speaking about that specifically from an agency perspective. Mary, I know you can, I just usually am not a part of that.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think there's a lot of ways. And some of those like specific examples are just things like your revenue versus your costs, like literally figuring out the return on investment. We do that for Veterans Conference. We're tracking that information. So something, as simple as that. There's also things that you can do that I actually haven't implemented, but I think are interesting. Like I don't know how much it costs for an attendee to attend one of our events. I know how much we're charging for ticket sales based on the value, but I don't necessarily know like what is the actual cost at the end of the day, like after the event, were things more expensive than you thought that they were going to be and stuff like that per attendee. I think that's kind of an interesting way to look at return on investment. And then also this is less tangible, but I do think it is still a measurable thing. It's just less tangible. Surveys. We definitely do surveys and feedback and all of those types of things. So that's absolutely one because you're measuring satisfaction to an extent. And then attendance. I also think you could, that's a good measurable thing. How many people attended last year versus this year. And then also how many people didn't show up. I think we love that number specifically. It's kind of fun to see that. So those are,
We
some,
love
I think,
it.
specific ways.
I don't know if we like that
We
number.
don't lo we don't love the number, but it's always
But
interesting.
it's insightful. It is, yeah. It's all data, right? So, well, yeah. Hopefully, you've learned something here about the business of events, Mary. Let's end with our last question here, Mary. What's the single biggest business habit that every event planner should implement today to treat their events like a business?
We said it at the beginning, and I wish this was more tangible, but truly, I think if you can look at your event from a more macro level perspective, that is one of the things that you can do. And I think that'll really serve you as a professional because you're not just reactionary with the little things that are happening that year, but you're helping strategize for years to come. And so that is my habit, I guess, that I would suggest. Logan, what about you? What would you suggest?
I feel like you could guess this. I'm going to talk about that post event report. I think it's so helpful. But I think the business habit out of it, as I would add another section or a line or a place where you capture relatively close to the event, whether you as the planner, as the organization would do this event again. And if it's like sometimes it's a hard no, sometimes it's a yes, but that I found is a really helpful, again, something from business where you're constantly kind of reevaluating the value of what you're doing. Was it worth it? Was it worth the time? And just putting that in while it's fresh, because again, a year later or months later, you're not really going to remember some of those hiccups. And that's been helpful for me as a business owner to literally say, yes, but it took more time. Therefore, I need to charge more. Or, yes, but my scope needs to be smaller because they needed help in all these other directions. And that's just not my expertise. Or, you know, that is a really informative spot that I would just make sure. And you could even break that down more of like with your vendors. Would you repeat with those guys? And having a yes, maybe not, let's shop around, just having that, not just here's what happened, but thinking through, yeah, what would the next steps be for next time? And then you avoid just rinse and repeating in a negative way.
I love it. I think that's a wonderful point. And this has been a fun conversation today. Hopefully, this gets your brain thinking more about business and events and how it's applicable. And so, thank you everybody for listening. And before our end, we have our bonus tip from Logan for today.
Yes, this bonus tip is for anybody who's doing an event that has cameras, or you might have heard me use the term IMAG, image magnification, at your event. Make sure you check with your production team, specifically if you have a technical director or a TD, to make sure that the graphics or the imagery you're going to have on the screens or on the background at the stage are going to play nice with your cameras. And what I mean by that is a really busy design is going to be really hard on the cameras to avoid showing the like pixelation that happens behind people. And I had this come up where we were talking about avoiding really bright white colors because that bright white on the screen, while it pops, also kind of acts as extra backlight behind your presenters, which then makes it hard for the cameras to balance the lighting. So just thinking, if you're going to involve cameras or IMAG, make sure you check with your production team if there's any suggestions on colors or graphics, or even sending them an example, just saying, hey, this is what I want to have on the screen during Q&A for 30 minutes. Will this look okay with the cameras on it? And any good TD or production person should be able to tell you yes or no.
I love it. Thank you, Logan. Great bonus tip today. Like specific and really good. I think that's something that we can look for in our next event. So thank you. And thank you everyone for listening to another episode of the Better Events Podcast. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Better Events Pod. You can email us at bettereventspod@gmail.com. You can join us in person in Seattle on Thursday, December 18th for our 2025 Better Events Conference by visiting bettereventspod.com/conference. Connect with us on LinkedIn as well. We'd love to hear from you. And if you want more Better Events content, we also have our private paid community on Substack where you can get more interaction. So thank you so much, everybody, for listening, and we will see you again next Wednesday.